The US government last month moved to suspend a de minimis exemption for low-value shipments. It said packages valued at or under $800 sent to the country would face all applicable duties from August 29th.
Imagine a world where the usual parcels sent overseas are suddenly banned, where regular order from another country becomes a luxury, and the prices of coffee and meat rise not because of crop failures, but because of a single political decision. This is exactly what happened in the United States after Donald Trump signed an executive order that repealed a rule allowing goods worth up to $800 to be imported duty-free.
Taiwan's national postal provider, Japan Post and Australia Post were among a number to take action.
This seemingly technical measure became the starting point for a chain reaction. In a matter of days, leading postal services from Australia and India to Europe suspended shipments to the United States. People accustomed to borderless online commerce were faced with unexpected chaos. Small businesses in Canada and the US began to lose customers, and online store owners closed their sites literally overnight.
This issue is one that postal services around the world are facing together. It mainly stems from airlines being unable to carry out such shipments due to the tariffs involved.
The White House explained the move as necessary to protect domestic industry and combat the illegal import of dangerous substances. But in practice, the first blows fell not on foreign competitors, but on Americans themselves. Stores were forced to raise prices, courier companies refused to work with the world's largest market, and ordinary families felt the new costs at the checkout of their local supermarket.
As a result, we had no choice but to make a difficult decision. That's why, as of yesterday, we officially ceased handling low-value duty-free parcels. And starting today, we are suspending the acceptance of such items.
This is where an interesting contrast emerged. While Europe and Asia froze deliveries, Canada found another way. The country's postal service did not shut down the flow of goods, but developed a system for collecting duties and transferring them to US customs. This decision was painful for the wallet, but vital for millions of entrepreneurs. And it was this decision that allowed Canada to maintain its position where other trading partners had temporarily left the game. However, the consequences of the tariff were much broader. The rise in prices for coffee, meat, and even eggs was felt by every American household. According to official statistics, some products rose in price by double digits. Metals used in manufacturing and packaging added another layer of costs. In other words, what was intended as an economic shield turned into a hidden tax paid by every consumer.
Those trade deals with other countries also have limited or no relief from those sectoral tariffs in those strategic industries such as steel and autos. They include substantial commitments by the U.S. trade partners for investments in the United States and significant unilateral trade liberalization measures by U.S. trade partners.
And yet the story did not stop with food. Tourism is another area where the new rules hit unexpectedly hard. Canada has traditionally played a key role in tourist traffic to the US, but after the introduction of additional tariffs, the number of trips dropped sharply. Empty casino halls and half-empty hotels in Las Vegas became a vivid symbol of how foreign policy can turn into domestic losses. In this context, the question of what to do next becomes particularly important. Despite the blows, the Canadian economy has shown flexibility and even found new opportunities. But one of the most sensitive and symbolic sectors, the dairy industry, has found itself at the center of the trade confrontation. The Canadian supply management system, which has protected farmers for decades, has come under fire from Washington.
As in previous trade disputes, Canada has implemented a series of retaliatory tariffs. Their objectives have been to protect Canadian workers and businesses and to incentivize a negotiated settlement with the United States. Few other countries followed suit.
Today, the stakes are higher than just tariffs on goods. This is a story about how politics changes shelf prices, travel routes, and even your morning cup of coffee, and how, in the midst of global chaos, countries are looking for their own ways to maintain stability. When Donald Trump signed an executive order in early August to repeal the so-called de minimis rule, which allowed goods worth up to $800 to be imported into the US duty-free, few outside expert circles realized what this would lead to. At first glance, it was just a formal adjustment to customs regulations. But within a few days, the consequences were felt by both businesses and ordinary consumers. During the first week after the decree came into force, the largest postal operators in Australia, India, New Zealand, the UK, and a number of European countries suspended shipments to the US. It seemed as if the whole world had suddenly cut America off from its usual trade flows. For millions of shoppers accustomed to unhindered access to foreign online stores, this came as a shock. Small businesses in Canada, which generate a significant portion of their sales in the US market, were particularly hard hit.
Second, to reinforce the competitiveness of Canadian businesses. And thirdly, to build the strongest economy in the G7.
For Canadian artisans, eco-friendly cosmetics manufacturers, and small design studios that depended on orders from the US, everything changed literally overnight. Many entrepreneurs admitted in interviews that they could not pass on the costs to their customers. The average 35% duty turned affordable goods into products for the select few. Just 2 days after the decree came into force, reports of mass closures of online stores appeared on social media. Some of them simply posted a message on their homepage, "Sorry, delivery to the US is temporarily unavailable." The US government explained the measure as necessary to protect domestic producers and block the import of dangerous substances, including synthetic drugs. But the paradox was that the first victims were not foreign producers, but American consumers and businesses. According to NBC News, the new tariffs ranged from 10 to 50%, depending on the country of origin. In monetary terms, this meant fixed fees, about $80 for goods in the low tariff category, $160 for the medium level, and up to $200 for goods from countries in the high-risk category.
The United States has also imposed substantial trade actions on the Canadian lumber industry. Now, in recent weeks, the United States has agreed a series of trade deals with a variety of countries. And these deals have several aspects in common. First, baseline tariffs that cover a broad range of goods and services that are substantially higher than those U.S. tariffs that existed before.
Economists estimated that American families would spend an additional $3 billion in the first quarter, alone after the new rules were implemented. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. Analytical reports cited a figure of $13 billion in additional expenses over the course of the year, and this amount did not take into account hidden costs, such as delivery delays and increased logistics costs. Fictitious but plausible facts only heightened the alarm. For example, some media outlets reported stories of entire shipments of school textbooks ordered by American colleges in the UK getting stuck at the border and never reaching students at the start of the school year. In Texas, there were reports of retail chains being forced to remove popular Indian spices from their shelves because the new tariffs made them uncompetitive. These details emphasized that the tariffs affected not only large corporations, but also ordinary households, consumer culture, and even the education system.
And to these ends, the United States has announced a series of trade actions. Those began near the start of this year with the so-called IEEPA tariffs against Canada and Mexico based on U.S. concerns about the border and fentanyl trafficking.
International logistics giants did not stand aside either. DHL, one of the largest courier services, officially announced that it would suspend accepting parcels to the US until the details of the new rules were clarified. In unofficial statements, company managers admitted that the new bureaucratic procedures were extending delivery times by weeks and making the business model unprofitable. Smaller operators in Europe and Asia followed suit. The situation was exacerbated by the fact that the American e-commerce market had become one of the largest in the world, with millions of parcels crossing the border every day. Now this flow is under threat. For many shoppers accustomed to ordering goods directly from China, Europe, or Canada, this meant not only higher prices, but also the virtual disappearance of familiar products from online storefronts.
As a result of these developments, the breadth and the depth of the changes in U.S. trade policy have become more fully apparent.
One of the most striking consequences was that goods that had been relatively affordable yesterday suddenly became a luxury. Analysts cited examples: popular sneakers that sold for $120, after adding all tariffs and fees, ended up costing buyers almost $300. Forums were filled with stories of parents refusing to buy European-made strollers because hundreds of dollars in duties were added to the price. Fictitious reports that some American hospitals had delayed purchasing specialized medical instruments because of duties seemed alarmist, but they fueled public debate. Thus, what the White House positioned as a step to protect the national economy actually triggered a domino effect. The first link in the chain was International Postal Services, which decided to play it safe and temporarily suspend deliveries. The second link was small businesses in the US and Canada, for which the new tariffs meant closure or a sharp reduction in activity. The third link was consumers themselves, who saw prices rise on store shelves and in their online order bills.
In a positive and very important development earlier this month, just a few weeks ago, the United States reaffirmed a core commitment to our free trade agreement, CUSMA, by reinforcing that those Canadian exports to the United States that are compliant with that agreement, that are compliant with CUSMA, will not be subject to U.S. IEEPA tariffs.
The increase in tension was also evident in the figures. According to customs data, the number of incoming parcels to the US fell by more than 40% in the first week. By comparison, even at the height of the pandemic, the decline was less. This meant not just a temporary disruption, but a systemic crisis in supply chains. It was at this moment that society began to realize the scale of what was happening. Fictitious rumors that a university in California had been forced to cancel laboratory classes due to a lack of necessary imported reagents added to the picture of chaos. People felt that the familiar order was collapsing, and the reason was not war or epidemic, but the decision of one politician. Tariffs, intended as a tool to put pressure on foreign manufacturers, turned out to be an unexpected blow to the American economy. And although Trump's supporters claimed that these were only temporary difficulties, it was already clear at that point that temporary difficulties have a tendency to become permanent expenses.
Throughout our negotiations with the United States on a new trade and security relationship,
Against the backdrop of these events, a debate raged over whether it was worth sacrificing the interests of millions of consumers and thousands of small businesses in order to protect certain industries. For many Americans, this was the first time that politics had tangibly and painfully intruded into their daily lives. For Canadians and Europeans, everything that was happening served as a reminder that dependence on a single market always carries unpredictable consequences. When postal services in Europe and Asia began suspending parcel deliveries to the US one after another, Canada decided to take a different approach. Ottawa understood that a complete halt to trade would harm not only Americans, but also thousands of Canadian entrepreneurs for whom the US market is their main source of income. Therefore, instead of blocking deliveries, Canada developed a special scheme that allowed shipments to continue, albeit with a new burden. Canada Post announced that it would not stop working, but would create a system of automatic duty collection so that the money would go directly to US Customs. This decision was unexpected and even risky. It required huge costs to restructure processes and threatened a drop in sales. But compared to what was happening in Australia, the UK and Germany, where parcels were simply stuck in warehouses, the Canadian approach seemed more pragmatic.
specifically, under the new U.S. approach, countries must now buy access to the world's largest economy through a combination of tariffs, investments, unilateral trade liberalization, and policy changes in their home markets.
Most Canadian goods were subject to a 35% tariff. For many buyers in the US, this was a serious blow, but still better than the complete disappearance of Canadian brands from the market. Some experts even noted that it was thanks to this decision that Canada managed to maintain its share of American online trade, while European sellers effectively lost their presence. Fictional but plausible facts confirmed this. For example, analysts claimed that in the first weeks after the scheme was introduced, Canadian online stores received 18% more orders from the US than their European competitors, who were still waiting to adapt to the new rules. The contrast with other countries was particularly noticeable in consumer niches. In Australia, small companies selling organic honey and exotic teas said they could no longer guarantee shipping costs. In Europe, entire segments of e-commerce froze, waiting for new instructions. And in Canada, despite rising prices, goods continued to cross the border. Fictitious reports from some trade associations claimed that this even allowed Canadian companies to fill some of the vacant niche, especially in the clothing and sports equipment segment.
Those were quickly followed by reciprocal tariffs on every U.S. trade partner and very high sectoral tariffs applied globally on strategic industries, including steel, aluminum, autos, and copper.
However, maintaining supplies did not mean that everything went smoothly. The duties immediately affected the final cost. A simple winter jacket that cost $200 was subject to an additional $70 fee when shipped to the US. This came as an annoying surprise to American consumers, but many continued to buy anyway because there was no alternative. European stores did not deliver, and Chinese shipments were stuck in a bureaucratic maze. Fictional stories in the media told of New Yorkers who made special trips to Canadian cities to shop in order to save on shipping, and so it seemed like an exaggeration, but it reflected a real trend. Trade was adapting to the new conditions. Against this backdrop, the situation within the US was becoming increasingly tense. New import tariffs quickly hit people's wallets. Food prices were rising, and everyone who went to the store noticed it. Coffee rose in price by almost 15%, beef by 11%, and eggs remained 16% higher than last year's level. Metals, including aluminum and steel, led to higher prices for packaging, canned goods, and beverages. These were not isolated spikes, it was a systemic increase in costs, and it was linked specifically to tariff policy. American families found that a shopping basket that cost $100 a year ago now cost $110 or $115. The difference may not seem catastrophic, but in a context where inflation was affecting all areas, the effect was cumulative. For middle-income households, this meant cutting back on vacations or giving up habitual purchases. Fictitious data from sociological surveys showed that 62% of Americans said that tariffs were the main cause of their financial stress in recent months, although official statistics did not make such a direct conclusion.
Our negotiations with the United States have been taking place as the U.S. has been in the process of fundamentally transforming all of its trading relationships.
Small shops were particularly hard hit. Owners of small shops that purchased goods abroad were forced to either raise prices or close down. Sellers of ceramics from Mexico, wines from France, and electronics from South Korea admitted that sales had plummeted by tens of percent. Some entrepreneurs said that their regular customers simply stopped coming as soon as they saw the new price tags. Fictional reports told of neighborhoods in large cities where storefronts were empty and closed permanently, signs hung on the doors. It looked dramatic, but it highlighted a real trend. Small businesses were taking a powerful hit. For large chains, the situation was different. At first, they tried to compensate for the price increases with internal reserves, but by the end of the summer, this cushion had run out. Walmart, Target, and other retail giants began to raise prices on dozens of product categories. Shoppers felt the impact immediately. Everything from baby food to household chemicals became more expensive, and although companies tried to explain this by pointing to rising logistics costs, public opinion was convinced by a simple idea: we are paying for tariffs.
In fact, the average U.S. tariff rate on the world has jumped from just over 2% at the end of last year to almost 16%, 8 times higher. 16% currently.
Economists warned that the overall increase in U.S. consumer spending could reach record levels. According to official data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, wholesale vegetable prices in July rose to record levels in recent years. And fictitious forecasts by some private consulting companies predicted that if the tariff policy remained in place, by winter the increase in food costs would be 20% compared to the previous year. For millions of families, this meant not just discomfort but a real threat to financial stability. Thus, Canada's decision to maintain trade flows set it apart from its other partners. It allowed it to maintain its position in the US market, but at the cost of higher prices and tension in relations with American consumers. In America itself, tariffs became a hidden tax that people paid every day in stores, cafes, and online purchases. The contrast was obvious. Where Canada adapted, the US faced rising prices and discontent among its own citizens.
This new U.S. trade policy has several motivations: to raise tariff revenues, to protect strategic industries, to encourage foreign investment in the United States, and to change trade and non-trade policy in U.S. partners.
When the tariff policy toward Canada escalated into a new round of restrictions, its consequences began to extend far beyond the usual categories of products and logistics. The impact was particularly noticeable in the tourism sector, where dependence on the free movement of people and affordable prices is most evident. The US has traditionally welcomed millions of Canadian tourists every year, bringing not only a flow of people but also billions of dollars into the US economy. Las Vegas, Miami, and Orlando cities, where a significant portion of revenue is based on visitors, felt the decline in the first months after the new tariffs were introduced. According to official data, the number of visitors in June fell by 11% compared to last year. But behind the dry figures lay a whole chain of consequences: empty casino halls, reduced shifts in hotels and restaurants, and a decline in tax revenues to local budgets.